You'll marry the match we picked. We froze your account so you'd stop resisting. My mother said it the way you'd announce the seating chart. Calm, final, a small smile. We were standing under a white tent at my cousin's June wedding, and she had just told a room full of relatives that my own bank had been turned against me to break me into agreeing. My father was 3 feet away, handing out cream-colored cards. Save the dates. For a second wedding. Mine. To a man I had never agreed to marry. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I looked at the cards moving hand to hand like party favors, and I felt the floor of my whole life tilt. What I did next, I had planned for months. They just didn't know it yet. I'm Tessa Holloway, 33, and the daughter standing quietest in that tent was the only one in our family who had already decided she was leaving. Let me take you back to how it started. It started with a phone call I couldn't make. It was a Tuesday in March, 3 months before the wedding, and I was standing in the produce aisle with a cart and a declined card. The cashier said it twice. Declined. I had a job. I had a salary. I had, that morning, almost $19,000 in my checking account, money I had earned coding insurance systems for 11 years. I stepped out of line, my face hot, and called the bank. The woman on the line was kind, which somehow made it worse. The account was active, she said. It just had a hold. A family hold. What does that mean? I said. A joint authorization was placed, she said, by another account holder. I had opened that account when I was 18. My mother's name was on it. I had never taken it off because I had never imagined a world where I would need to. I drove home with the groceries I could pay for in cash, which was 2 cans of soup and a bag of apples, and I sat in my car in the driveway of the house I rented, and I did not go inside for a long time. The thing I kept thinking was, not how could she? It was how long? How long had she been able to do this? How long had she been watching the number, deciding when to use it? That night my mother called me, and she did not mention the account. She asked if I'd eaten. She asked if I was sleeping. She asked, the way she always did, in a voice as soft as folded laundry, whether I'd given any more thought to Wesley. I want to tell you who Wesley was, but first I want you to understand what kind of family asks a question like that, and then freezes your money when you say no. We were not poor. We were the kind of family that looked, from the outside, like the answer to a prayer. My father, Gerald Holloway, owned a regional building supply company that had put our name on a road and a Little League outfield. My mother, Lorraine, ran the house and the church flower committee and, it turned out, the bank. We had a long table and matching chairs and a portrait above the fireplace where I was 8 and gap-toothed and standing exactly where I was told. I was an only child. People think that means spoiled. It meant the opposite. It meant there was no one to absorb the attention, no sibling to split the plan between. The plan was all aimed at me. And the plan, for as long as I could remember, was that I would be sensible. I would not be like my mother's sister who married for love and got left with 2 kids and a leaking roof. I would not be like the girls my mother clucked over at church, the ones who chose feelings over futures. I would be steered, and if I steered well, the prize at the end was their approval, which I had been chasing my whole life like a dog chases a car it can never quite catch. I called my mother back the next morning. I tried to sound calm. "There's a hold on my account," I said. "Did you do that?" A pause, not a guilty one, a patient one. "We'll talk about it at dinner Sunday," she said. "Mom, that's my money." "Tessa," she said, and I could hear her settling into her chair, the way she did before a verdict. "Some money is just on loan from your good sense, and lately you haven't been showing much of it." She hung up before I could answer, and I stood there in my kitchen, 33 years old, holding a phone, and I realized 2 things at once. The first was that I had to get out. The second was that they had already decided I never would. But that morning, I still thought I could reason with them. That was the last morning I thought that. Before I go any further, if this is already sitting heavy in your chest, take a second to like and subscribe. It tells the algorithm to put this story in front of someone else who grew up steered instead of seen. And drop your city and the time it is where you are in the comments. I read them, and I like knowing where in the world someone is hearing this. Now let me get back to that Sunday dinner. I almost didn't go. I want you to know that. I sat in my car outside their house for 10 minutes, watching the porch light. the same yellow porch light that had been turning on for me my whole life. I had decided things in the days between the phone call and that dinner. Quiet things. I had gone to a different bank and opened an account with only my name on it. I had moved my paychecks to root there starting the next cycle. I hadn't told anyone, not because I was sneaky, because I had learned, very young, that in my family a plan only survived if it was silent. But I went in, because some part of me still wanted to hear them say it wasn't what it looked like. Dinner was pot roast, the good plates. My mother had set out the cloth napkins, which meant it was a performance, not a meal. We got through the small talk, the road project, the new pastor. Then my father set down his fork, folded his hands, and said the thing I'd been waiting and dreading to hear. "Oh, we've been talking to the Ashbys," he said. "Wesley's a good man, steady, the family's fit." I looked at my mother. She was buttering a roll like the most important thing in the world was getting the butter to the edges. "Fit for what?" I said. "For a marriage," my father said, like I was slow. "His people and our people have worked together for 30 years. He's not asking for anything you can't give, and he'll take care of you when we can't." I said the only true thing I had. "I don't love him. I barely know him." My mother set down the knife. "Love," she said, the way you'd say a child's word. "Your aunt loved. You know how that turned out." "I'm not my aunt." "No," my mother agreed. "Your aunt at least listened when she was young." It went around like that, each pass a little tighter, my father naming the Ashbys' acreage and their standing and how a man like Wesley didn't come along twice. My mother naming every girl she knew who'd thrown herself away. And me, getting smaller in my chair, the way I'd gotten smaller in that chair my whole life. Then I said it. "And the account? Was that part of helping me too?" My father looked at my mother. My mother looked at me. "You weren't going to be reasonable," she said. "So we made being unreasonable inconvenient. You'll thank us." I want you to sit with that sentence the way I had to. They had reached into the one place that was mine, the 11 years of work, and turned it off like a porch light, and they called it a kindness. And the worst part, the part I am ashamed of, is that for 1 second a voice in me whispered, "Maybe they're right. Maybe you are being unreasonable. Maybe this is love and you've just never learned to read it." That voice was the wound. I want you to remember it because it comes back. I tried, that night, to make them see me. I told them about the 11 years, the systems I'd built, the team I led, the raise I'd gotten that I'd never even mentioned to them because mentioning my own wins had never gone well in that house. I told them I had a life. My father listened the way you listen to a weather report for a city you don't live in. When I finished, he said, "That's nice, Tessa, but a career isn't a family. You'll see when you're older what matters." I was 33. He said when you're older like I was still a girl who hadn't started. My mother reached across the table and patted my hand. "We're not punishing you," she said. "We're saving you. There's a difference, and someday you'll thank us for knowing it." I drove home that night and the holds were still on my account, and I lay in my dark, rented bedroom, and I did not feel angry yet. I felt 8 years old. I felt like the girl in the portrait, standing exactly where she was told. Here is the part of the story I have to back up to tell, and then I promise we'll go forward and we won't come back. When I was 9, I had a teacher named Mrs. Day who wrote on one of my papers, "Tessa has her own way of seeing things." My mother found it in my backpack and she didn't yell. She just looked at it for a long moment and said, "Your own way is how people end up alone." She wasn't cruel about it. That's what I need you to understand. She believed it. She had built her whole life on the idea that wanting things for yourself was the first step toward losing everything, and she was raising me to be safe from my own wanting. So I learned to stop wanting out loud. I got good grades the way you'd pay a tax. I dated the boys my parents liked and felt nothing and called the nothing maturity. When I was 24 and a man named Daniel asked me to move to Denver with him, and I wanted to. I wanted to so badly my hands shook, my mother sat me down and said, "If you go, don't expect us to be here when it falls apart." I didn't go. Daniel went. I told myself I'd dodged something. For 9 years, I let myself believe that. The leverage was never just money. The money was new. The leverage was older than that. It was the porch light. It was the promise, never spoken but always there, that if I stayed inside the lines, I would belong, and if I stepped over them, I would be alone in the dark forever. That was the deal. That was the only deal they'd ever offered me. And now they were calling in the deal, with a man named Wesley and a frozen account, and I was finally, at 33, old enough to read the contract. Now we go forward and we stay there. The week after that dinner, I did something I had never done in my life. I said no out loud in writing, and I let it sit. I texted Wesley Ashby. I'd gotten his number from my mother, who had given it to me just to talk. I wrote, "Wesley, I know our families have ideas. I want to be straight with you. I'm not looking to get married and not to an arrangement. No hard feelings." He wrote back in under a minute. That's how I learned what kind of man he was. "My father already put a deposit on the venue," he wrote. "Talk to your dad." Not, "I understand." Not, "I'm sorry to hear that." A deposit on a venue. For a wedding I had said no to in writing 30 seconds earlier. I read it 4 times. There was already a venue. There was already a deposit. The thing I thought I was refusing was a thing they had already half built without me. I called my father. He didn't deny it. "It's a good rate," he said, "and a hard date to get." We had to move. "You booked a wedding venue," I said. "For me. Without asking me." "We asked you for years," he said. "You kept not answering, so we answered for you." And there it was, the whole machine of my family in one sentence. My silence, the silence they had trained into me since I was 9, was being counted as a yes. Every time I had folded, every time I had swallowed what I wanted to keep the porch light on, they had logged it as consent. I had taught them I would always cave, and now they were spending that lesson like cash. I hung up, and I did not cry. And I want you to notice that, because the next thing I did was the first free thing I had ever done. I opened a spreadsheet. Not for revenge, for me. I listed everything I owned that was actually mine. My car, paid off. My new account, with 1 paycheck in it now. My retirement, which they couldn't touch because I'd been smart enough at 25 to use a workplace plan with only my name on it. My skills. My lease, which ended in August. I listed what I would lose if I walked. The frozen 19,000 which they controlled. My grandmother's house, which my mother had told me my whole life would be mine someday, if I was good. The portrait, the porch light, their approval, the version of me that belonged. I looked at the second list for a long time. It was the list of everything I had been promised in exchange for being steered, and I understood finally that I would never actually be handed any of it. The promise wasn't a gift, it was a leash with a treat painted on the end. So I made a decision, alone, at my kitchen table, and I told no one. I would let the wedding plans go forward. I would not fight them on the phone, where I always lost. I would say yes to nothing and no to nothing. I would let them build their whole beautiful machine. And at my cousin's wedding in June, with the whole family watching, I would do the one thing they had spent 33 years making sure I would never do. I would walk out and not come back. That was the plan. What I didn't know yet was how much they were willing to spend to stop it. If you've ever been the quiet one who everybody assumed would just go along with it, I want to hear it. Tell me in the comments about the moment you realized your silence was being counted as a yes. I read everyone. The first thing they did was make me feel crazy. My mother called the day after I told my father no. She was bright, warm. She said she'd talked to him and that of course nobody was forcing anybody, that I'd misunderstood, that the venue was just an option, that I should come look at it, just look, no pressure. She said the word force like it was absurd, like I'd dreamed it. By the end of the call, I almost believed I had. This is the part of being managed that nobody warns you about. They don't just push you. They edit your memory of being pushed. By the time I hung up, I was the unreasonable one, the dramatic one, the daughter who couldn't take a simple suggestion. I had to write down what had actually been said on paper just to keep my own mind. I went to look at the venue. I told myself I was gathering information. The truth is, part of me still wanted to be wrong about them. It was a vineyard an hour north. The kind of place with string lights and a barn that cost more than the barns it pretended to be. Wesley met us there. He shook my hand like we were closing on a property. He was not cruel. He was worse than cruel. He was indifferent. He talked to my father about drainage and to my mother about catering and to me about nothing at all, because in the math of that day, I was not a person at the table. I was the table. At one point, my mother pulled me aside by the rose bushes and squeezed my hand and said, "I know it's a lot, but Wesley's family can do things for us. Your father's had a hard year. This helps everyone." She said it gently, like she was letting me in on a secret, like I should be grateful to be useful. That was the first crack in their story, a hard year. I filed it away. On the drive home, my mother talked the whole time about flowers, and I said nothing. And somewhere on the highway, I understood that my silence in that car was being recorded again as a yes. So when we pulled into their driveway under the porch light, I said it clearly. "I'm not marrying Wesley." My mother's face didn't fall. It hardened, smooth and quick, like water turning to ice. "You've always been like this," she said. "Selfish, after everything we've given you." And there it was. The word she'd been saving, selfish. The thing I'd spent my whole life arranging myself to never be. She knew exactly where to put the knife because she was the one who'd taught me to fear the wound. I got out of the car. I walked to my own car. And as I pulled away, I saw my father standing in the doorway, and he didn't wave, and the porch light stayed on behind him, and for the first time in my life, it didn't look like home. It looked like a sign on a trap. That night, I started quietly to take my mother's name off everything I could. The new account was already clean. I changed my passwords. I had my mail forwarded to a box only I had the key to. Small keys. I was collecting small keys to small doors, building myself a way out one lock at a time. But the big door, the front door of their house, the one I'd had a key to since I was 12, that key was still on my ring. I looked at it every day. I knew I'd have to give it back. I just didn't know yet that giving it back would become the loudest thing I ever did. What they did next made the account look like a warning shot. A hard year. My mother had said it by the rose bushes and then pretended she hadn't. So I did the one thing my family never expected from the quiet daughter. I went looking. I didn't hire anyone. I didn't plant a camera. I didn't keep a notebook of their sins. I want to be clear about that because that's not how this turned. I just paid attention, the way you pay attention when you've finally stopped being afraid of what you'll find. What I found was public, mostly. My father's company had taken on a big municipal contract 2 years back, and it had gone bad. The way these things go bad, with delays and a lawsuit and a lien I found in the county records on a Saturday morning at the library, because some things you don't search for at home where they can see your face. The lien was for a number with a lot of zeros, and the company that held a chunk of his debt, the company he'd partnered with to even survive the year, was Ashby Materials, Wesley's father. I sat in that quiet library and I finally understood the shape of the thing. I wasn't a bride. I was a payment. My father owed the Ashbys more than he could pay in money, so he was paying them in me. The marriage wasn't a fit. It was a settlement. And my mother, who had frozen my account for my own good, wasn't protecting me from a bad decision. She was making sure the collateral didn't run off before closing. I want to tell you, I felt rage. I didn't. Not yet. What I felt was grief. The clean, cold grief of finally knowing exactly what you are to people. For 33 years, I had wondered if I was loved badly or not loved at all. Now I knew. To my father, I was a line on a balance sheet. To my mother, I was a risk to be managed. The wondering was over. And the end of wondering, it turns out, is the beginning of being free. But I needed to be sure I had the shape of it right, and not just the shape my fear was drawing. So the next week I went back to the library and then to the county office, and I read more than I wanted to. There was a second filing I'd missed the first time, a notice of default, dated in January, 2 months before my account got frozen. The timeline lined up like teeth in a zipper. January, the default. February, my parents started talking up Wesley in earnest. March, the hold on my money. They hadn't drifted into this. They'd built it on a schedule, the the way my father built everything with a deadline and a critical path. There was something else, too, smaller and worse. In the public minutes of a city council meeting, my father had stood up and blamed the project's failure on a subcontractor, a small outfit run by a man I half remembered from church, a quiet man with a bad knee. My father had thrown him under the bus in public to save his own name. I read his words in the dry official record, and I thought, this is who he is when he's cornered. He finds a smaller person and he spins them. He'd done it to a subcontractor. He was doing it to me. I closed the laptop. My hands were steady. That scared me more than shaking would have. I had wanted my whole life to be the kind of person nothing rattled. And here I was, finally calm, and the thing that had made me calm was learning my father would sell anyone to save himself. That's a terrible way to finally grow up, but it was the way I got there. I drove home the long way, past the road with our name on it, Holloway Road. I'd been proud of it as a kid. That night, it just looked like a name a man had bought to feel permanent. I didn't stop. I kept driving, all the way to the only person in the family who'd ever looked at me like a person. I called Aunt Carol from the car. She picked up on the second ring, like she'd been near the phone. "I think I need to talk to someone who left," I said. She didn't ask who. She said, "Come over. I'll put the kettle on." Aunt Carol's house was small and warm and full of plants she talked to. She made tea. And when I told her everything, the account, Wesley, the lien, the default, the wedding I hadn't agreed to, she didn't gasp. She just nodded slowly, like a doctor confirming a diagnosis she'd suspected for years. "Your mother," she said, "has been afraid her whole life. And she decided a long time ago that the cure for fear was control. She tried it on me first. It didn't take." She smiled, sad and a little proud. "It took on you. That's the only difference between us, Tessa. I ran when I was young and stupid. You stayed and got smart. There's no shame in either one." "Everyone says you ruined your life," I said. "Everyone in that family says that," she said, "and I've slept fine every night for 30 years, so you tell me who ruined what." I almost cried then, not from sadness, from the relief of being believed. She was the ally I didn't know I'd been starving for. She didn't hand me a weapon. She handed me something better. Permission. What I didn't know was that I was about to cost her something for it. Because Aunt Carol, it turned out, had her own stake in this, and her own scar. She told me, that first night, only part of it. The rest came out over the next few weeks, in pieces, the way the truest things do. When she was 22 and pregnant and newly married to a man my grandparents hated, she had asked the family for help. Just a loan, just enough to fix the roof before winter. My mother, who was older and already married well, had been the one to say no, not my grandparents. My mother. "If we bail her out," my mother had said, in a kitchen Carol could still picture, "she'll never learn." Carol had spent that winter putting buckets under the leaks while her babies slept. She had never forgotten who held the door shut. So when you call me," Carol said, "and you tell me your mother froze your money to make you marry a stranger, I'm not surprised, Tessa. I'm just sad it's the next generation's turn." "Why did you stay close to them at all?" I asked. "After that." She looked at her plants for a while. "Because they're still my blood, and because somebody had to keep a door open for whichever kid finally tried the handle. I figured one of you would someday." She reached over and squeezed my hand the same way my mother did, except it meant the opposite. "I'm glad it's you, and I'll pay for it, you know. The minute Lorraine finds out I'm helping you, I'm out of the family for good. Christmas, the funerals, all of it. So let's make it worth my exile, all right?" I started to tell her she didn't have to. She waved me off. "I left when I was young and stupid," she said. "Let me leave one more time, on purpose, for something that matters." That was the night I stopped being alone in it. And it was also the night the cost got real, because now it wasn't just my future on the table. It was hers. She was the warning my mother had used against me my whole life, the cautionary tale, the woman who chose love and lost. And she was choosing again, with her eyes open, to lose whatever was left. But here's what none of them knew. While I was sitting at Aunt Carol's table learning I could leave, my mother was at home learning that I might. Because I'd made one mistake. I'd let myself hope out loud just once to the wrong cousin. Pause here for a second. They've just shown you what they really think you're worth. If you were me, sitting in that library knowing the truth, what would you have done next? Tell me your honest answer before I tell you mine. The cousin was Bryn, my mother's sister's other daughter, the bride-to-be, the one whose June wedding all of this was orbiting. I'd run into her at the dress fitting my mother dragged me to, and Bryn had been kind, or I'd thought she was kind, and in a weak moment in the parking lot I'd said, "Honestly, I don't think I'm going to go through with the Wesley thing." Just that, 11 words. By the time I got home, my mother knew. I learned later that Bryn called her mother, who called my mother within the hour. In my family, hope traveled faster than any other kind of news. The next morning, my mother called me, and the warmth was gone, and so was the pretending. "You've embarrassed us at the fitting," she said. Talking about leaving, in front of Bryn. I said one sentence. "You said enough. Do you have any idea what you're putting your father through? The Ashbys are this close to calling the lien. Do you want to watch him lose the company? Is that what your independence is worth to you?" And there it was. The whole weight of it laid on me at last. I wasn't just refusing a man. I was, in their telling, the daughter who would bankrupt her father out of selfishness. My no had a price tag now, and the price was everything they'd built, and they wanted me to carry it. For 3 days, I almost broke. I want to be honest about that. I lay awake doing the math my father had done, the math that turned me into collateral, and part of me thought, maybe I should just do it. Maybe one unhappy life is a fair trade for everyone else's happiness. Maybe that's what love is. Maybe that's what being good means. That was the wound, talking in my mother's voice. Your own way is how people end up alone. What pulled me out wasn't anger. It was a smaller, stranger thing. I was at work, debugging a system at 2 in the afternoon, and a junior engineer I'd been training named Priya asked me a question, and I answered it, and she said, "How do you know all this?" And I said, without thinking, 11 years. And I heard myself say it, 11 years. I had built something, with my own mind, that no one had given me and no one could freeze. And I thought, they can take the 19,000, they can take the house, they can take the porch light, they cannot take the 11 years. That was the moment the plan stopped being escape and became a choice. But then they escalated, and they did it in a way I hadn't planned for. My mother called my boss. I don't mean she did anything illegal. She was too careful for that. She called the main line of my company, sweet as anything, and told whoever answered that she was Tessa Holloway's mother, and she was worried about her daughter, that I'd been going through a hard time. Not myself, making some decisions the family was concerned about. She asked, in that soft, reasonable voice, whether there was an employee assistance program. She left her number. She made it sound like love. My manager, a decent man named Reuben, called me into a room 2 days later and told me, carefully, that my mother had reached out, that he wasn't going to act on it, that he just wanted me to know. I sat across from him with my face on fire, because here was the genius of it. She hadn't accused me of anything. She'd just gently suggested, to the place where I'd built my one independent thing, that I might be unwell. If I got angry, I proved her point. If I stayed calm, I looked like I was hiding something. There was no clean way out of the frame she'd built. That was always her art. "I'm fine," I told Reuben, and I heard how it sounded, the way fine always sounds. So I took a breath and told him the truth instead, a clean, small piece of it. My family wants me to marry someone I don't want to marry, and I've said no, and they're not handling it well. That's the hard time. I'm not unwell. I'm leaving them. Reuben was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Okay, what do you need from us to make that possible?" And I could have wept, because it was the first time in months that a person in authority had responded to my no by asking how to help me keep it instead of how to break it. What I needed, it turned out, was the remote transfer I'd been eyeing. Reuben made it happen by the end of the week. My job could now live anywhere. My mother, trying to use my work against me, had accidentally handed me the last lock I needed to pick. That afternoon, Priya found me in the break room. She'd heard something, the way people in offices always do, half of it wrong. She didn't ask for the story. She just sat down across from me with 2 bad coffees and slid one over. My mom didn't talk to me for a year when I married Dev, she said, out of nowhere. Different religion. She came around eventually, but that year was the loneliest of my life, and also— She stopped, turned her cup. Also the first year I felt like a whole person. Both things. At the same time. Nobody warns you it's both. I had not told her anything. She just knew the shape of it, the way people who've walked through a door recognize someone standing in front of one. Does it get easier? I asked. The same question I'd asked Diane Ashby. I was asking everyone that spring. I was collecting evidence that a person could survive leaving. It gets truer, Priya said. Easier's not the right word. But you stop performing, and after a while you forget how exhausting the performing was, and then one day you catch yourself just, I don't know, sitting in a room, not bracing. That's the thing nobody tells you you've been missing. The not bracing. I thought about that for the rest of the day. The not bracing. I had been bracing my whole life. I braced at the dinner table, at the rose bushes, on the phone, in my own kitchen. I had a body that had never once, not for a single hour, been allowed to set itself down. And here was a near stranger telling me that on the other side of the loneliest year was a thing as small and enormous as sitting in a room without flinching. That was the moment I stopped being afraid of the loneliness. Not because it wouldn't come, because I finally understood it had a far shore. I went home that night and I added one more line to the bottom of my spreadsheet, under the list of everything I'd lose. It wasn't a number. It was 3 words, the not bracing, and it outweighed every line above it. I called Wesley one more time, not to plead, to be sure. If I marry you, I said, what happens to my father's debt? A pause, then, flatly, my dad and your dad have an understanding. That's their business. So it's real, I said. I'm the understanding. You're making it ugly, Wesley said. It doesn't have to be ugly. You'd want for nothing. I'd want for everything, I said, and I hung up, and I almost never spoke to him again. I say almost because there was one more conversation, and it wasn't with Wesley. It was with his mother. If you're still with me, here's where it stopped being a plan and started being a war they didn't know they were losing. What do you think Wesley's mother wanted from me? Tell me your guess before I tell you what she said. Diane Ashby called me on a Thursday evening. I almost didn't pick up an unknown number, but something told me to. She was not what I expected. I'd built Wesley's whole family into one cold machine in my head, and his mother turned out to be a tired woman with a tired voice who got to the point fast. I'm going to say something my husband would kill me for, she said. You don't want this marriage. I can hear it. And honestly, Tessa, I don't want it either. Wesley isn't a bad man, but he's not a husband. He's a placeholder. This whole thing is your father and my husband solving a money problem with a wedding cake on top. I had one of those. I don't recommend it. I sat down on my kitchen floor. Then why are you letting it happen? Because I'm one vote in my house and it's not the loud one, she said. But I'm telling you, woman to woman, if you find a way out, don't let anybody guilt you back in. Not your father, not your mother, not the money. The money will sort itself out one way or another. It always does. It's just men's pride dressed up as a crisis. She paused. I wish someone had told me that at 33. It was the strangest gift. The enemy's wife, leaning across the lines to tell me to run. It told me something too, something I'd half suspected. The crisis was not as solid as my parents made it sound. The lean was real, but the desperation was theater, and the marriage was the cheapest way out for 2 proud men who didn't want to do the hard, dull work of just paying what they owed. Can I ask you something? I said. Does it ever get better after you leave a thing like that? Diane laughed, not unkindly. I didn't leave, she said. That's the difference between us. I stayed and I got comfortable, and comfortable is a slow way to disappear. You're being offered the chance I didn't take. Take it for both of us. I never spoke to her again either, but I think about her. The woman who told the collateral how to escape the deal she herself had signed 30 years ago. That call did something to my plan. Up to then, a quiet part of me had still believed I was wrecking something real, a true family crisis, a father who might genuinely go under. Now I understood the crisis was partly a performance, a pressure they were applying because pressure had always worked on me. The lien would resolve the way liens resolve, through lawyers and payment plans and pride swallowed in private. They didn't need my wedding to survive. They wanted it because it was easier than humility, and because, somewhere underneath, they could not stand the idea that I had become a person who could say no. There was one more place the deal lived, and I made myself go look at it because I knew that if I didn't, it would be the thing that pulled me back. My grandmother's house. The one my mother had told me my whole life would be mine someday, if I was good. It sat on a quiet street near the old part of town, white clapboard, a porch swing, a maple my grandmother had planted the year my mother was born. I had loved that house since I was a child. I had imagined a whole life in it, a life where I was finally trusted with something, where the family handed me a door and said, "This is yours. You earned it." It was the single most powerful thing they held over me, more than the 19,000, more than the porch light, because it was a future. And futures are the easiest thing in the world to use against a person who has never been allowed to choose her own. I parked across the street and I looked at it for a long time. And then I did the math I'd been avoiding. My grandmother was gone. The house was my mother's now, to give or to keep. And my mother had spent my whole life dangling it. Someday, if you're good, which meant she had never once intended to simply give it to me. She intended to trade it. The wedding to Wesley, I understood, sitting in my car across the street, would have come with that house as the reward. Be good. Marry the match. And the door you've wanted your whole life will finally open. They had been saving it as the bribe that closed the deal. I made myself say it out loud in the car. It was never going to be mine for free. And then harder. And I don't want it on those terms. That was the second time my own calm scared me, because I meant it. I drove away from the White House with the maple and the porch swing, the house I had wanted my whole life, and I felt something let go in my chest that I'd been gripping since I was a girl. They could keep it. They could keep all of it. A house you can only have by disappearing into a marriage isn't an inheritance. It's just a nicer cage with a better view. I never drove past it again. I had 3 weeks until Bryn's wedding. I used them to get small. I gave notice on my lease for August. I packed quietly, a little each night, into boxes I stored at Aunt Carol's. I confirmed the remote transfer. I wrote one letter by hand to my parents, and I did not mail it because I knew where I'd give it to them. I took my name off the one credit card we still shared. I closed the loop on every lock but one. The front door key. I kept it on my ring. I knew what I was saving it for. 10 days before the wedding, they sent Bryn. I don't think she knew she was being sent. That's the thing about my family. They use the people who love you against you, and they make those people feel like they thought of it themselves. Bryn showed up at my door on a Tuesday with a bottle of wine and red eyes, and I let her in because she was the one good thing about that side of the family, the cousin who used to share a bed with me at reunions and tell me ghost stories until we both couldn't sleep. "I'm getting married in 11 days, she said, "and the whole family's at war, and it's about you, and I just want to understand." So I told her. The real version, the account, the lien, the default, the timeline. I watched her face do what Aunt Prue's hadn't, which was let it in. "That can't be right," she said, but quieter, like she already knew it was. "Ask your mom what the Ashbys do for a living," I said. "Then ask her why Wesley's family is on your wedding's vendor list." She went pale at that because she hadn't put it together, that the men squaring a debt with my life had wormed their way into her wedding too. Her caterer. Her bar. The web was wider than even I'd thought. And then she did the thing my whole family does, the thing I'd done myself for 33 years, the thing the wound teaches you. She tried to make peace by asking me to bend. "Couldn't you just," she started, "just get through the wedding day? Not actually marry him. Just don't blow it all up at mine. I've waited my whole life for this day, Tessa. You can leave Wesley in the fall, quietly, after. Just don't make a scene at my wedding." There it was, the same deal, in a kinder voice. Be good, stay small, protect everyone's nice day. Disappear politely, on a schedule that works for other people. I almost said yes. She was crying, and I loved her, and the wound in me wanted nothing more than to be the easy one again, the one who keeps the peace, the good cousin. I felt the old yes rising in my throat like water. And then I thought about Aunt Carol, who had stayed small for 40 years to keep other people's days nice, and I thought about Diane Ashby, who had gotten comfortable and slowly disappeared, and I thought about the girl in the portrait standing exactly where she was told. "Oh, Bryn," I said gently, because I did love her. "If I get through your wedding the way they want me to, I'll get through every wedding that way, including the one they're planning for me. Quiet is how they win. I can't be quiet anymore, not even for you. I'm sorry." She left without the wine. I heard later she went straight to my mother's house and cried, and that my mother held her and said, "See what Tessa's doing to all of us." Turning even Bryn's broken heart into another stone to lay on me. That was the last conversation before the wedding, and the whole time my mother kept calling, and the calls changed shape. First angry, then wounded, then, near the end, something almost tender, which was the most dangerous of all. "You used to be such an easy child," she said one night, and her voice cracked, and for a second I heard a real person under the manager, a woman who'd been scared her whole life and had only ever known one way to hold on. "I just wanted you safe, Tessa. The world is so hard on women who choose wrong." And I almost said okay, because that was the truest thing she'd ever said to me, and it was still a cage. "I know you did," I said. "I know you were scared, but I'm not going to be your cure for it anymore." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Then maybe you should come by the house this weekend. Just family. We'll talk. No Wesley, no plans. Just us." And there was something in how she said it, something settled and sure, that should have warned me. I should not have gone. I knew it walking up the steps, but the wound wanted one last try at the porch light, and so I went. It was an ambush, of course, a gentle one, which is the only kind my family ever ran. When I came in, it wasn't just my parents. My Aunt Prue was there, my mother's sister, Bryn's mother, the family's appointed referee, sitting in the good chair with her hands folded like a judge. There was coffee out. There was a plate of the lemon cookies my mother only made when she wanted something. The whole staging said, "This is reasonable. This is loving. You are the only thing in this room that isn't calm." "We just want to understand," Aunt Prue began, in the warm voice they use right before they take something from you. "Help us understand, Tessa. Wesley's a good provider. Your parents have given you everything. Why are you doing this to them? 3 against 1. That's how they like the numbers." I looked at the 3 of them, the coffee, the cookies, the careful staging, and I understood that this was the real wedding rehearsal, a rehearsal of the room where I'd finally cave. So I did the thing they never expected. I told the truth, plainly, in their own living room, under the portrait of the gap-toothed girl. "Dad owes the Ashbys money," I said. "The marriage settles the debt. Mom froze my account in March, 2 months after the default notice, so I couldn't leave before the wedding. I'm not confused, Aunt Prue. I understand it completely. That's the problem." The room went still. Aunt Prue's face moved through several things at once, and I watched her decide not to believe me, because believing me would cost her too much. "That's a terrible thing to say about your father," she said. "It's a terrible thing he did," I said. "Saying it out loud doesn't make it worse. It just makes it mine to talk about." My father stood up then, and his voice climbed, and for the first time he stopped pretending. "You think you understand business," he said. "You think because you read something at a library you know how the world works. I have carried this family for 35 years. The least you can do, the very least, is one good marriage to a good family. That's not slavery, Tessa. That's what daughters used to be for." The sentence hung there. That's what daughters used to be for. My mother flinched at it, even she. Aunt Prue looked at her coffee. I did not raise my voice. I just stood up too. "Then I'm the wrong kind of daughter," I said, "and I'd rather be the wrong kind than no kind of person at all." I walked out before they could rearrange it into something else. As I drove away, my phone was already lighting up, Aunt Prue, my mother, the machine cranking back to life. I turned it face down on the passenger seat. The ambush had failed, but I knew them. A failed ambush doesn't make my family retreat. It makes them go bigger. And the biggest stage they had left was Bryn's wedding. So they took it. 2 days before the wedding, my mother called Aunt Carol exactly as Carol had predicted. Somehow she'd learned where my boxes were. Somebody had seen my car in Carol's driveway one too many times. The call, Carol told me afterward, lasted 4 minutes and ended my aunt's place in the family for good. "She called me a snake," Carol said, almost cheerful about it. "Said I'd poisoned you, said I'd always been jealous of her good life. 40 years of buckets under a leaking roof, and I'm the jealous one." She laughed, but I heard what it cost. "It's done now, Tessa. I'm out. So whatever you're going to do at that wedding, do it like a woman who's already free, because 2 of us are now." I drove to her house that night and I sat with her and I tried to apologize for what helping me had cost her, and she wouldn't let me. "I told you," she said. "I wanted to leave one more time on purpose. You gave me the excuse. Don't you dare apologize for the best decision I've made since I was 22. But I saw her hand shake when she set down her cup, and I understood that walking away clean is a thing you say and a thing you feel, and those two are not always the same size. She had lost her whole family in a 4-minute phone call for me. The least I could do was not waste it. If you've made it this far, you already know how the room got quiet. Stay with me, because what they did in front of everyone was worse than anything they'd done in private. Bryn's wedding was the second Saturday in June, at the same vineyard with the string lights, which I understood the moment I drove up was not a coincidence. They had picked it on purpose. They wanted me to stand in the place that was supposed to be mine. I wore gray. I parked my own car at the far end of the lot, facing out, the way you park when you intend to leave. I had a small bag in it with everything that mattered, because I had learned to never be anywhere without my own way out. The front door key was in my coat pocket. I had taken it off my ring that morning, and I knew exactly where it was going. The ceremony was fine. Bryn cried. Her mother cried. My mother sat beside my father in the front row and did not look at me once, which was its own kind of message. During the vows, I let myself watch my mother instead of the bride. She sat with her spine straight, her chin up, her hands folded, the picture of a woman in control of her family and her day. And I understood, watching her, that the control was the whole thing. It wasn't a tool she used to get what she wanted. It was what she wanted: a daughter who married well, a husband who stayed solvent, a family that looked from the outside like the answer to a prayer. The neat surface was the prize, and she had decided, decades ago, that my life was one of the things the surface required. "You'll marry the match we picked." I could already hear it coming. I didn't know yet that she'd say it out loud in those words at the gift table, but I knew the shape of it. I'd known the shape of it since I was 9, since "your own way is how people end up alone." The sentence had been forming my whole life. She was just waiting for an audience to finish it in front of. I almost left before the reception. I sat in a folding chair near the back during the vows and thought, "You don't have to perform this. You could just drive away right now and never explain." And maybe that would have been cleaner. But I owed Aunt Carol a clean break, not a quiet disappearance. And I owed the girl in the portrait a moment where she was finally seen choosing. So I stayed for the reception. I stayed for the room. It was under the tent that it happened. There's a moment at every wedding when the noise dips, when the band takes a break and the speeches haven't started, and the room is just a low hum of people being happy. My mother chose that moment. She always had a gift for timing. She tapped a glass, just enough, and a little circle of family turned toward her. My father, Aunt Prue, Bryn, and her new husband, a dozen relatives with drinks in their hands, and my mother smiled at me across the tent, and she said it loud enough to carry. "Tessa, come here. We have something to celebrate." I walked over, slowly. The way you walk toward something you already know is going to hurt. We're so happy for Bryn," my mother said to the circle, "and we have our own happy news. Tessa's getting married too, in the fall." A ripple of soft surprise, congratulations starting to form on faces. To Wesley Ashby, the families are thrilled. And before I could speak, my father reached into his jacket and pulled out a small stack of cream-colored cards and began to hand them around the circle, smiling, the proud father, passing out save the dates for a wedding I had said no to in writing, twice, to 2 different people. I watched the cards move from hand to hand. I watched my own name printed beside a stranger's. and I felt, distantly, the old pull, the porch light pull, the voice that said, "Just smile, just go along, don't make a scene, don't be selfish." Then my mother leaned in, close to my ear, but not quietly, never quietly, and she said the thing that ended it. "You'll marry the match we picked. We froze your account so you'd stop resisting. It's done, Tessa. Be gracious about it." She said it the way you'd announce the seating chart, and she was smiling. "Here is where you've been waiting for me to detonate, to pull out the lien, to stand on a chair and read Wesley's texts to the room, to make my father's debt public, to read the council minutes where he sold a subcontractor to save his own name, to watch my mother's face, to hand the relatives the receipts and let them gasp. I want you to know I had every piece of it. I knew about the lien and the default and the Ashby debt and the understanding. I had Diane Ashby's voice in my memory telling me the crisis was theater. I could have burned that tent down with the truth, and every person in it would have turned on my parents, and I would have won. I didn't want to win that way. I'd watched my family win that way my whole life. Control, leverage, the public knife. If I did it back to them, I'd just be one of them with the volume up. And the thing I wanted, the thing under everything, was not to beat them. It was to stop belonging to them. So I didn't raise my voice. I looked at my mother and then at my father with the cards still in his hand, and I said plainly, so the circle could hear, "I'm not marrying Wesley. I never agreed to. You can keep the money. You can keep the house. You can keep all of it." The congratulations died in the air. Someone set down a glass. My father's face went red. "Tessa," he started, "this is not the place." "It's exactly the place," I said. "You picked it. You wanted everyone to see me say yes, so they can see this instead." "After everything we've given you," my mother said, and her voice was climbing now, the smooth ice cracking, the manager losing the room. "You ungrateful, you'd do this to your father? With his health, with the business, you'd throw away your family for what? Pride?" "For peace," I said. "Oh, you don't even know what you're doing," she said, and she was loud now, too loud, the way the controlled one gets when control slips. She turned to the circle, to Aunt Prue, to the relatives gathering them. "She's not well. She's been listening to that snake carol. She doesn't mean this." And then, the old reflex reaching for the frame. "Tell them, Gerald. Tell them she's confused." But my father didn't tell them anything. He stood there with the cards in his hand, and I watched him do the math one more time, and I watched him realize in front of everyone that there was no version of this where he came out clean. If he called me confused, someone would ask what I was confused about. If he stayed silent, the silence said it all. For once, his timing failed him. And in that silence, I reached into my coat pocket and I took out the front door key, the one I'd had since I was 12, and I laid it on the gift table, on the white cloth, next to the wrapped boxes meant for Bryn. "That's the key to your house," I said. "I won't be needing it." My mother stared at the key like it was a living thing. My father's mouth opened and closed, and the relatives, the whole soft circle of them, looked back and forth between the smiling parents and the quiet daughter and the small brass key on the white cloth, and they understood all at once that they had been told a story that wasn't true. Aunt Prue found her voice first. "Tessa," she said in the warm referee tone, "let's step outside and—" "No," I said, "just that." And it was the easiest no I'd ever said, because I'd already said all the hard ones, in writing, on the phone, in their living room, alone for months. This one was just the last lock. "You'll regret this," my father said then, and his voice shook, and for the first time in my life, he sounded not like a verdict, but like a man who was losing. "You'll be alone." And that was the moment I'd been afraid of my whole life. The exact words, the deal, spoken out loud at last. Step over the line and be alone in the dark forever. I waited for the terror to come. It didn't. "Maybe," I said. "But I'll be myself, and I've never actually had that. Not once. Not in 33 years. My mother was crying now, the angry kind, the kind that blamed the room for making her cry. "You're breaking this family," she said. "No," I said, "I'm just no longer holding it up." She reached for me one last time, The same hand, the same squeeze she'd used at the rose bushes, the same one she'd used my whole life to steer me gently back into the lines. I let her take my hand. I didn't pull away. I just held it for a second, and I looked at her, really looked, the way she had never once looked at me. "I hope you stop being scared someday, Mom," I said. "I really do, but I can't be the thing that does it for you." Then I let go. I picked up my coat. I did not slam anything. I did not take a single thing off that table. I walked the length of the tent, past the string lights that were supposed to hang over my own wedding, past Bryn, who looked at me with something I finally recognized as envy, past the band coming back to their instruments, and I stepped out from under the white canvas into the June evening, and the air outside was just air, ordinary and enormous, and I kept walking to my car, the one I'd parked facing out, and I got in and I drove. If you have ever had to walk out of a room full of people who were sure you'd stay, if you have ever laid down the key and meant it, I want to hear from you. Tell me what you set down and what you walked toward. I read every single one. I didn't go far that night. I drove to Aunt Carol's, where my boxes were, and she opened the door before I knocked, like she'd been waiting, and she didn't ask how it went. She just looked at my face and put the kettle on. We sat up late. At some point she said, "Did you use it? The debt, the lien, any of it?" And I said no. And she nodded slowly and said, "Good girl, not because they didn't deserve it, because you didn't need it." And I understood she'd been testing whether I'd come out the other side as myself or as a smaller copy of them. I'd passed. I hadn't even known it was a test. I'd like to tell you my parents called the next morning to apologize. They didn't. My father called to tell me I'd humiliated him. My mother called to tell me the inheritance was off the table now. The house would go to a cousin. Did I understand what I'd thrown away? I said I did. I think I surprised her by not arguing. There was nothing to argue. She was right. I had thrown it away. That was the point. The Ashby wedding never happened, obviously. I heard through Aunt Carol, who heard through the one cousin who still spoke to her, that the deal between the families fell apart and that things got hard for my father's company for a while. They did not lose it. They restructured, the way men like my father always do, with lawyers and pride swallowed in private rooms, exactly like Diane Ashby said they would. The crisis that was supposed to require my whole life turned out to be a payment plan. I won't pretend I felt nothing when I heard he'd be fine. He's my father. But I didn't do it to him. He did it to himself years ago when he decided his daughter was an asset he could spend. I just stopped being spendable. I never had to say a word about the lien to anyone. That part still feels right to me, that I never used it. I left it where it was, true and quiet, and I walked away clean. I moved in August, 3 states over, to a city where no one knew my last name was on a road. My job came with me. The first month, I kept reaching for a phone that wasn't ringing, kept bracing for a porch light that wasn't there. No contact is not a triumphant feeling. I'll be honest with you. It's a grief with the volume turned down. Some nights I missed them so much I ached. Not the people they were, but the parents I'd spent my whole life waiting for them to become. Aunt Carol calls on Sundays. We are each other's family now, the two who left, 22 and 33, 2 generations of the same refusal. She tells me about her plants. I tell her about my work. Sometimes one of us mentions Lorraine, and the other one lets it go quiet, and that's all right. You don't have to hate the people you leave. You just have to stop letting them hold the key. But here is the thing I learned, the thing I came here to tell you. For 33 years, I believed the deal. Be steered and belong. Step over the line and be alone. I believed that being myself and being loved were 2 doors, and I could only walk through one. They taught me that when I was 9, with a teacher's note and a soft, certain voice, and I carried it like a true thing into my 30s. It was never true. I am not alone. I have Aunt Carol, who calls on Sundays. I have Priya, the junior engineer who became a friend, who once asked how I knew so much and gave me back my own life in the answer. I have a manager who responded to my no by asking how to help me keep it. I have mornings that are quiet because I chose the quiet, not because someone froze it into me. I have a small account with only my name on it, and it is the richest I have ever felt, and there is barely anything in it. If you grew up steered instead of seen, if your silence was always counted as a yes, if someone you loved offered you belonging in exchange for becoming smaller, I need you to hear this. You are not selfish for wanting your own life. The deal they offered you was never real. There was never a version where you got both their approval and your soul, and the day you finally believe that is the day you stop chasing the car. I lost the money. I lost the house. I lost the family I was supposed to have. I will not lie to you and call it a clean win. But I laid the key down myself. Nobody took it from me. And the first morning in my new apartment, I woke up and the silence in the room was mine, and I lay there and I said out loud, to no one, "There you are." Because I'd finally stopped waiting where I was told. I'd finally turned and looked at the girl in the portrait, and instead of standing where she was put, she'd walked out of the frame. I'm 33. I'm starting late. And I have never once regretted laying that key on the white cloth and walking into the ordinary, enormous air. Last week, I bought a small print at a market down the street, a watercolor of a maple tree, and I hung it where I can see it from the kitchen. Not because it reminds me of the White House I gave up, because it doesn't. It's just a tree I liked that I chose, with money that's only mine, on a wall in a room where I no longer brace. That's where I am now, and for the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I chose to be.